How many comrades and friends are following the new impeachment thing? You know, sort of based on the Trump's call with the president of the Ukraine. I know, it's all over the place. You know, I suspect why they do that, but whatever, you know. I'm not going to... Comrade John Catt, for those of you who were wise enough to attend last week's meeting, gave what I thought was a substantial opening to this discussion. And I wouldn't be surprised if we return to this discussion on a weekly basis, at least a monthly basis, because it's a struggle that's out there, and new things are happening, and different things are happening, and it's changing. It's becoming more arguably substantial. I'm not going to go into that, and I'm not going to cover what happened today, the interesting things or whatever. There'll be time to do that, I think. Although, frankly, I think that it would be of great interest and help to the party if comrades use these discussions to say what they think about this, or whether they think about it at all, or whether they're dismissive of it, or what is their concern about it, and also to reflect what they're hearing from other people, especially young radicals, about it. Is it something going on up here, not on their radar screen, or is it different? The day-to-day developments in the impeachment struggle in the ruling class are important, but the main point I want to make today, and hopefully I'll only speak a few minutes really, because we're going to come back to this, is that in order to put what is happening in its proper context, it's important for revolutionaries to understand this from a Marxist perspective and from a historical perspective, not just in a linear way. This person was arrested, they sent this subpoena, Trump's not cooperating with Congress. This all may inevitably be very important. Constitutional crisis, what they're calling it now. But this is a deeper significance. Is Trump just an aberration? Is he more crooked than most bourgeois politicians? Arguably, I think that's a tough argument. That he cares about it less. Is his mental state worse than other billionaires and other politicians? Is he more reactionary? Well, certainly in a forceful, outward way, he is. And I don't think that can be minimized. Though, when we say that, we must also say that, the difference between him and the other politicians in state repression is not that great, But there's a difference, This is different. This impeachment struggle, the new one and the old one, it comes from a collapse, not a complete collapse yet, but a partial collapse of what one might call the capitalist political establishment. What's the capitalist political establishment? It's not the whole bourgeoisie. Sometimes it's cut off from the whole bourgeoisie. It's not, the 1% or the 1% of 1% or the billionaires or those who own, manufacturing and, the bankers, the barons of finance capitalism. It's the politicians. It's the bourgeois politicians, from the Democrats and the Republicans, the media, other forces in the bourgeoisie that try to affect what people think in the interest of the bourgeoisie. That's the political establishment. And it has collapsed to some extent. Arguably, Trump's election was also a sign of that. What's the job of the political establishment? Very important. Some of us Marxists call it the superstructure. meaning that it's on top of the base. The base is class society. The base is, the means of production and all the wealth is owned by the bourgeoisie. But on top of that, the bourgeoisie, in its wisdom, puts a lot of stuff to confuse us, and part of that is the superstructure of which the political establishment is part of. Their job is to, do the bidding, the interests of the ruling class, try to do it in a way that conceals the nature of capitalism, conceals that this is class society, and therefore, hopefully for them, to some extent, placates the working class and inhibits it from rising up. But to do all that, a political establishment has to be able to present an appearance of stability. And they have lost that. This is the biggest imperialist power ever to antagonize and oppress the people and animal life of this planet, And all over the world, when they look here, they see this political instability, and it's freaking the bourgeoisie out in other parts of the world and here. So it's a big thing. That's what's behind this. And what's behind that, the instability, the partial collapse, is something deep but not so deep. Apparently it's getting close to the surface and maybe open up, like a, when does the ground open up? What do you call that? Whatever. Yeah. And that's a capitalist crisis that is looming and growing and dangerous and frightening for the bourgeoisie, and that they can't figure out how to fix it. Within that context, there is the standing of U.S. imperialism around the world, which is on the decline, and they're desperately trying to find a way to restore that. I'm not saying that everything that's happening is directly connected to that, but believe me, when we study this from the distance of time, we'll remember the context. What's happening in the bourgeoisie here is a sign that things are becoming unglued. That is, in large part, good news if we understand it and take advantage. That's good news for revolutionaries and for the working class. It doesn't do our job. We've got a lot of work to do. But it's good news. But there's another side to it, too. And, I'll wind down by talking about that. What's the danger for the working class movement in this impeachment crisis? And for the revolutionary left? The easy answer to that is that a lot of people, out of fear, just follow the leadership of the Democratic Party. And that's a very weak reaction to the dangers of the bourgeoisie, be they Trump or somebody else, because the leadership of the Democratic Party is beholden to the bourgeoisie. They're worried about their funders on Wall Street just as much as the Republicans are. And the leadership of the Democratic Party, I'm talking about Pelosi and some of the others, the ones who really have the authority, they're afraid of a struggle. They're trying to get away from anything. The last thing they want. They're afraid of the workers. They're afraid of the masses. They're afraid of the ruling class, because oftentimes the ruling class, doesn't want them and would prefer the Republicans. So relying on the Democrats is a very, very weak hand to play. And it has the effect, to the extent that happens in the movement and in the working class, of depriving the working class of an independent role, which it needs. Trump, whatever he is or isn't, we know that he has a potential to implement fascist policies. And it's not just the state, although it is the state that's carrying out the war against the oppressed, particularly migrant workers. He also has a following. And people pay attention when he calls for, as he did a few days ago, a civil war. Comrades, remember that? See, that's an important thing to remember. Subpoenas and all that stuff, I don't know how important that is. That's bourgeois politics, bourgeois lies, and it's above us and it's above the working class. Although, we should follow it and understand it, because some of it may be more significant than others. But when he threatens a civil war, that's a dog whistle. That's signaling fascist elements and potentially fascist elements that you should get ready and keep your powder dry, because this may go to the next level, a violent level. All of this, and this is part of understanding this from a Marxist perspective and from a historical perspective. All of this is leading to some kind of big development, some kind of big social and political struggle, whether the sharpening of the economic crisis, layoffs, and austerity, and other things that's going to happen sooner or later to the workers, as if they're not beat up enough, financial collapse, whatever, that'll intensify this. But it's leading to something big. And I think as revolutionaries, even though we don't know exactly what that is yet, this is what we have to focus on. It's as significant as the outcome of the 2020 elections. It's as significant as any other part of this impeachment fight. I think the bigger difference for us is to be dismissive of what's going on. I'm not sure about this, and that's why I'd like to know what people think, especially young radicals. A lot of people may be dismissive of it because, first of all, we're not in control of it. It's a fight that the bourgeoisie is having, the Democrats and the Republicans. Who cares? Whatever. And we're trying to do something different, and we're sort of, not only willingly alienated and removed from that, but don't care much about it. That's completely understandable. But what's happening is important for the workers and the oppressed. I don't think I have to itemize that. I know Comrade Teresa feels it very strongly when she talks about the war against the migrant workers, but that's just one example. We can't be dismissive of this. The big question is, what is the left, particularly the revolutionary left? That's what I consider the people in this office tonight to be. Not exclusively, but a strong part of it. And the rest of the working class. What is it going to do in the wake of this impeachment fight? Is it going to try to intervene, whatever that might mean? Is it going to do anything? I want to segue into a big development that's almost a month old that seemingly has nothing to do with the impeachment fight, but I would argue the other way. The General Motors strike. General Motors strike, I believe, just entered its fourth week. And I'm not an expert on it. There are comrades who may know more about it, but it's intensifying. And to the surprise of the bourgeoisie, and maybe even some of the leadership of UAW, who I'm suggesting might want an easy way out, the workers are remaining strong and militant, And finally, this strike made it on the front pages of the New York Times, with an article that says it's causing problems, Maybe that doesn't represent much, but I think maybe it does, If we had a labor movement that was remotely halfway militant, instead of just having these 50,000 workers or close to that out, that's a big strike. It's the biggest auto workers strike in at least 20 years. A lot of small strikes, but this is a big one. And this is a big manufacturing strike. We've seen the teachers, we've seen workers in the gig economy go on strike. But this is the first strike of this size, a national strike, more important in some areas of the country than others. This is the first big heavy industry strike, almost a month old. The labor movement, at least the official labor movement, every day some of us wonder why they haven't called demonstrations. There's some support stuff going on. I know when workers and progressives are near the various GM plants, they go there on Sunday. I think they call them Solidarity Sundays, and they join the picket line. But I mean, New York, it's a big city. It's the banks on Wall Street that are telling, the bosses in GM what they can and cannot do. Wouldn't it be nice to take it to Wall Street? A little lesson. I apologize for speaking a little bit longer than I have. If the imperialists do something against Venezuela or Cuba, or with the Zionists against the Palestinians, we notice that sometimes as revolutionaries. And if we can, we respond to it. And responding isn't easy. Everybody knows, especially those activists who shoulder a lot of the responsibility, that, we got so few people in relative terms, and so many things that we need to respond to. And so you have to figure, can you respond to this? Can you respond to that? But this GM strike, this major strike, my guess is that probably doesn't come up on our radar screen like an attack on the Palestinians or some attack on Venezuela. It's not our fault. But what I'm trying to explain is how our weaknesses affect even our consciousness. Maybe we don't think about it that much. Well, maybe I'm wrong. That's possible. Or maybe we say, well, there's a labor movement. They're not isolated. They got much more than the Palestinians got. They got much more than our comrades in Venezuela got. They got much more than the latest black or brown victim or trans person who was just murdered by the cops. And there's some truth to that. However, but we the working class, isn't this important to us? I'm sorry for the divergent, but I think about this a lot. I think next week will be officially the fourth week, next Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday. I know that the labor fraction of the party talked about it last night, and also the executive committee of the ICC talked about it last night. And they're recommending that the party, around the actual 1 month anniversary of the strike, see if it can organize some activities, see if it can utilize the International Workers' Solidarity Network to do that. I say this knowing that it's not easy, because everybody's overburdened and tired. But it's something that I think comrades should take up, either to do on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, or even next weekend if that's better. But something, maybe on Wall Street, maybe a better place. I don't know whether it's a wise thing to get a subcommittee here now, but somehow over the next few days, we should try to get a subcommittee together. And while we do it, so that it will be a little bit more than just a symbolic action. And it doesn't have to be big. No one's demonstrated on Wall Street in support of the general workers' strike. So if a handful of people are on Wall Street doing it, believe me, it's a plus. But with our literature, we may be able to explain to other radicals who are progressive, who even consider themselves revolutionary, why the General Motors strike is important. And why they should feel that it's their strike and not just someone else's responsibility. Anyway, just getting back to the impeachment crisis. I'm not going to recommend or propose anything by way of intervention. I mean, you could think of 100 things. I mean, setting up a nationwide coalition to do a people's impeachment of Trump based on his attack on immigrants and his racism and his homophobia and all the reactionary things, instead of the constitutional corruption bullshit, which I don't think a lot of workers are interested in, frankly. We could do that, that we may be able to do more, but at least that would be something. They're going to attack us one way or another. My biggest fear is not the outcome of the elections yet. It's that his fascist base, all of his bases in fascism, that they're already planning to do something. And no matter who wins the election or which candidate in the Democratic Party falls and which rises. It's up to us to be prepared to defend our class. This is what we've learned about fighting fascism on a small level, on a medium-sized level, and on a big level. The only way to defend ourselves is to assert ourselves, is to be bold. And I'm thinking that sooner or later, the sooner the better. This is to try to underscore what I was trying to convey, is this struggle in the ruling class, which is complex and hypocritical, and Trump is awful, but he's more a reflection of capitalism than anything else. You know, he's capitalism without any disguise. You know, whereas some other politician might, you know, have the good mask on. That this is very big. And even though it's over our head, and there's nothing we can do in the immediate sense that would make us a player in it, it portends something big happening. It portends a bigger social and political struggle. And there's a lot at stake for a party like ours, for people who consider themselves socialists and revolutionaries, and for the general working class. You know, will we be able to find a way, however imperfect, however large or small, to intervene, or will we sort of just, it's overwhelming, it's not, you know, it's not our terrain, it's not on our radar screen, it's a battle somewhere else, you know, and you know, it'll be a challenge for us. Something as simple as calling alternate people's impeachment proceedings around some of the issues like Sarah raised, that would be one idea. I think it's a good starting place. But even that, well, depending on circumstances, that might be symbolic more than substantial, but maybe you have to start with the symbolic and see if you can move it to something that actually is substantial, meaning that a lot of social forces are involved in it. But comrades and friends, we have to think on this. We have to really put our heads together and think on this. A lot is at stake. There's fear. There are dangerous negative possibilities, but there are also important breakthrough opportunities for the working class if it can get its act together and embrace some revolutionary leadership. You know, and this is the kind of period that the world is descending into. Maybe descending is not the right thing. Also, too, just a final word on the Constitution and bourgeois democracy. We understand as revolutionary Marxists that talk of the Constitution and bourgeois rights and bourgeois democracy is not as important, perhaps, to us as it is important for the bourgeoisie that uses bourgeois democracy to conceal itself. However, bourgeois democracy, as opposed to some more authoritarian form of rule, or fascism, or a military dictatorship, is preferable. Why? Not because we love bourgeois democracy, because workers can organize. They can organize where they work. They can organize in their community. They have certain rights. Of course there's oppression, especially against the most oppressed. But we definitely want an environment where workers are free to organize. Unions and revolutionary communist organizations and have occupations. And so we've got a dog in this race. You know, it's not about the bourgeois parties or their system, except for the fact we want their system to be over ASAP. But we also want to defend and widen and strengthen the rights of our class. We just have to figure out We have to figure out what steps to take. And it's a very serious discussion. And I hope we do a lot of thinking about it and talking about it in the final 2.5 months of this year.